And we're back. We've had so many questions following our first episode of FlashPoint. We thought, let's do it again. Shane is back to answer as many questions as he can. So here goes. Shane, you accurately predicted the fuel price change going into April, and we saw an intervention by government of R3, which equates to 6 billion for a single month.
Thank you, Crystal. It's nice to be back. By the way, I didn't predict the fuel price increase. I estimated it based on under-recoveries that are published. So this is information in the public domain. And if you know how to read it, it's not that difficult to estimate. So it did come through, but we did see government intervention as well. But despite that, we've still had the biggest single largest price increase on record.
Since at least 1994, I know previously the only comparable shock was during the global pandemic and around June, July 2022, where the diesel increased by R2.30 and the petrols by about R2.57. Now in April, what did we see?
In April, we saw R7.51 on diesel and R3.06 on petrol. So really massive price increases. And of course, they would have been a lot larger had government not intervened and subsidized the fuel levy by R3 a litre.
There's so much to unpack with the pricing. Let's start with the basics. Fuel levies and pricing in South Africa. Now that people understand fuel levies and that they are crucial sources of revenue, explain the implications of R3 relief or the 6 billion rand that the government gave us for April.
Yeah, the 6 billion comes from the fact that we sell or consume about 2 billion litres of fuel in South Africa every month. So when you subsidize it by R3 a litre, that's 3 times 2 equals 6 billion rand. And that's 6 billion rand that government has put forward as a subsidy to bring some relief. But it's 6 billion rand that can't just be written off. It probably needs to be repaid somehow.
They did mention that it was physically neutral, which means they'd recover it elsewhere. And then they made it very clear in the press release that it was a 1-month intervention.
Yes, I saw that. And if you look at it from that perspective, then the likelihood is in the end, you and I are going to pay for the 6 billion rand somehow.
Government does need to collect their taxes. Why does government collect fuel levies? Many South Africans just say that they should be scrapped, but it's really not that simple.
It's a very important part of how government earns revenue. So I think it equates to about 5 or 6% to everything government is able to rake in. And it follows pay-as-you-earn tax, VAT, and then corporate tax. I mean, these are government revenue streams. So in addition to that, the fuel levy is a very important part of government revenue streams.
And I think importantly, before we started, we said that this is not unique to South Africa. I think a lot of South Africans feel that we are the only ones burdened with it. But you mentioned that almost every country globally has some form of fuel tax or levy.
Correct. It's not unusual for government to tax fuel. In some cases, there are countries in the world that have higher taxes than we have.
Thanks for clearing that up. Let's move on. Just explain to us the basic fuel price, or as we refer to it, the BFP. It's basically the starting point of what we see at the pump price, but I want you to expand on that.
One of the things people need to understand is that the basic fuel price is a benchmark price. It's actually a formula that determines what it would cost today to bring a litre of finished product, petrol or diesel, to the coast of South Africa. And it factors in various things. The biggest part of the basic fuel price is the cost, the crude oil cost, which obviously is factored into that as well. And then the freight cost, that's quite expensive. That's probably 98 to 99% of the BFP. But it's basically a benchmark price. And people that participate in the industry, or fuel sellers, if I can put it that way, need to attempt to beat that price, or at least match that price when they bring fuel into the market.
And I feel the need to mention for everyone in the back there that yes, South Africa must import. There is no way for us to produce all our own fuel. If I'm listening to you correctly, Shane, if the oil prices go up globally, or the rand weakens, or shipping becomes more expensive, the BFP will inevitably go up, and that's what's going to push the fuel price up.
Correct. As I've said before, if you don't have the stuff yourself, you have to go and buy it on the international market if you want fuel, if you need fuel. And when you do that, you're buying it in crude oil. You're buying it in US dollars today. And naturally, the cost of crude is going to affect that. And the rand-dollar exchange rate will affect that as well.
And then after the BFP, is that where we see taxes get added?
Correct. So you have the BFP almost at the base level. Then you have the taxes that get added. Then over and above that, you have a wholesale margin that gets added. You have secondary distribution costs and storage costs that get added. And basically that builds up to something that we refer to as the wholesale list price of fuel. For petrol, you have the retailer margin that gets added. And we then have a regulated pump price for petrol. For diesel, the wholesale list price is essentially a reference price that we work off because diesel is not regulated the way petrol is.
And do you think that's a good thing?
I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but I think that's the way it's developed. And I think it's once you understand the detail of how it works, it's actually pretty clear. And it's quite predictable to work off.
One thing I'll always remember is when I started and you sent me on some training to actually understand the fuel pricing. One of the things that's always mentioned is that we as a country have one of the most transparent ways that we price and build up our fuel pricing.
That's true. We do. And it's actually quite practical to adjust the fuel price on a monthly basis. It's just when you have a unique situation like we have currently, I mean, we've never seen a situation like this before, then suddenly you have this huge jump because a month is a long time. But generally speaking, it's practical. It works quite well. The BFP formula is quite good. It gives you a sense of what's really happening in the world. And if you think about it, I mean, one way to understand it is like this. If you want to use a benchmark price, which you need to do if you don't have the raw material yourself or the feedstock yourself, if you're going to set the price of fuel today and you look into the market and you realize that to bring a litre of fuel in, it's going to cost you 10 Rand. Let's just use that as an example. You realize that it's 10 Rand, and that's based off genuine information that you have at your disposal today. Tomorrow it may be 11
True.
or 10.50 or 9.50 because it changes every day. And it's not practical to really change the price of fuel every day. We've gone and opted for a monthly system. So what we do is we look into the market and we set the price at 10 today because that's the number today. Tomorrow we look into the market and we see that the price is 11. We keep it at 10. We look into the market again the next day, we see it's 12. We keep it at 10. But we factor in or we record the fact that we've under-recovered because the real price is actually starting to go up. Then what we do at the end of the month is we tally up all these under or over recoveries as the case may be, and we look at an average and we then pass that average as a price increase or decrease. So in simple terms, what we are doing in any given month is fixing what we didn't get right or what moved against what we were thinking in the month before. So there's a lag effect in the market. And what the lag effect sometimes does is it creates a cash flow, a negative or positive cash flows for importers. And we refer to that as a slate, and there's a mechanism through which the slate can either be recovered or needs to sort of be paid back in the form of a negative or positive slate levy.
Like you said, that's rather transparent. I think it's important for us to just state what moves the fuel price daily. There's generally two items that drastically move our fuel price.
Yes, it's the crude oil price, which obviously is an essential part of how you make fuel. And the other part is the rand-dollar exchange rate, because we have to source fuel or crude in dollars.
Let's talk about the real-world impact. You mentioned a tough April, and there is still a lot of misinformation out there. How does this impact a critical sector like agriculture, transport, construction, and mining?
Massively. Massively. There's big concern out there around, ultimately, I think, the survival of participants or players in those sectors. But I think even more importantly, how consumers are going to be able to afford the fallout of such a massive price increase. If I can mention just the agricultural sector, I think the impact there is absolutely huge. Fuel plays an important part in terms of production. It plays an important part in terms of transport. And it plays a very important part as well in terms of actually getting the produce sold to the consumer. So there's a ripple effect, and those costs, you'll see them coming through in those different areas that I've mentioned. And each time they will knock up the final price of produce to the consumers. The other thing that we're seeing in the agricultural sector, and let me be very clear, there are shortages in the market in terms of fuel supply. That's a fact. And we saw Agri SA recently mention the fact that almost 50% of all farmers in South Africa are struggling to get access to fuel. And quite a big percentage that have been able to get access are also limited in terms of the stock that they're able to, or the fuel that they're able to access. So there's been a massive impact there. And I've mentioned before on the transport side, I've spoken to a few transporters as well. It's very clear that the price increase that we are seeing is going to increase their transport costs by something like 20 to 25%, which is massive. And again, those transport costs need to go somewhere. So ultimately, it's going to land up with South Africans. So it's going to be dark and gloomy in April. And probably even if things start turning around for a while still.
Even if farmers are securing a limited volumes, farming cannot function with inadequate access to fuel. It's just not possible. And this is why it's so critical. Once the product is harvested, we obviously transport it. And you mentioned that agriculture is heavily exposed, as well as the transporters. But this also impacts production and then the exports, because a lot of our farming produce gets exported.
100%. And if I can just add, we're approaching harvesting time. So the strooptyd. So it's an incredibly critical time. And the impact of this is huge.
Fuel is the bloodstream of the economy at the end of the day. So when it becomes more expensive, everything it touches becomes more expensive.
100%.
You also mentioned we're exposed to global economics. That raises a common question. Why don't we just rely on ourselves and build our own refineries?
Well, we had that model for a while, but we failed to look after it. And today, as a result, we have less than half the refining capacity we had 10 years ago. And we are now very reliant on importing fuel. So we need to realize that that's the case. And you still have a choice. I mean, we could try and improve the model and make it attractive to investors, build refineries again. But even if you have crude oil refineries, let me make it clear, you still have to import crude oil, and you're then still exposed to the dollar, and you're still exposed to the rand-dollar exchange rate. It's not a magic fix, right? So we will continue to have challenges as South Africa. And if we do not have a strong economy, we expose ourselves to what happens on the international stage in a big way, because it will be difficult for us to react without a strong economy. So when you're having an economy that's not growing and an economy that's not strong, and you're fully reliant on importing fuel as an example, you put yourself in a precarious position.
I want to go back to Sasol and Secunda, because the general public does get almost stuck on the fact that we have Sasol and Secunda, and that it's not producing oil or petrol and diesel and everything from crude, but it's producing it from coal.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit about this process, how it works, and very, very specifically that even though it's produced here, it's still going to follow a global oil price?
So a while back, in 1950, the government decided to create Sasol, because the then government felt it was quite important for South Africa to be as self-sustainable as possible, all things considered. And it built Sasol in Mpumalanga, close to where there is lots of coal. And it used what is referred to as the Fischer-Tropsch process. I think these were two German chemists that figured out how to create or produce liquid fuel from coal. It built a refinery that used that process. And so Sasol was built, and Sasol was government owned at the time. And what Sasol did was it took coal. I used to work there, so I know a little bit about it. Took coal, put it into a gasifier, injected oxygen that created spontaneous combustion, and released two important gases, hydrogen and carbon monoxide. Those gases were taken through a plant called Sasol, and at that plant the gas was quenched. What that means is the gas was clean, the impurities were removed. Post that, the gas is essentially condensed and turned into light oil. And from there, you then have a very similar process to the normal refining process. So that's how you produce fuel from coal, which Sasol did, from the time it was built in the 1950s all the way through. But Sasol was listed on the JSE in 1979. And despite the fact that government still had control over the company then, over time, the government control over Sasol dwindled. And today, Sasol is a listed company. Government does not have direct control over Sasol. Sasol competes, as does all the other majors, on the South African petroleum stage. And I think while government still is the single biggest shareholder, it's not a controlling shareholder. So those are not the same thing. And as I said, Sasol competes with everybody else, right? So Sasol cannot just be used by government to help solve the problem. That's the first point. The second point is Sasol only produces something like 30% of what South Africa needs. So the 70% gap needs to be dealt with by importing fuel to South Africa. And once again, we are exposed.
No matter what we do, we are not insulated from global cost pressures. And it's also not a cheap process. It can very quickly become a very complex answer, but thank you for trying to break that down for us. Refining locally changes where we process fuel, but not what we pay for it.
Correct.
Thank you. I really needed that. You did mention the production capacity of Sasol. Tell me what South Africa's daily consumption looks like.
Daily consumption, I think it's around 500,000 to 600,000 barrels a day. What's interesting is Africa's consumption is around 4 million barrels a day. And then if you look at a country like the United States, I mean, if you look at the size of the United States and the number of people versus the entire African continent, you find there that the United States consumes something like 19 to 20 million barrels a day. Now, what's interesting about a barrel of crude oil, I like to refer to it as the magic barrel, is that you get about 100 liters of petrol and diesel out of a barrel. A barrel is 159 liters. So you get other things out of a barrel as well. You get gas, you get liquefied petroleum gas, you even get plastic out of a barrel, you get all kinds of things out of a barrel. But you get about 100 liters of petrol and diesel out of a barrel, about 60 liters of petrol and about 40 liters of diesel. And so when you look at 600,000, if you can do some arithmetic with me, if you're looking at about 600,000 barrels a day times 100, that's about 60 million liters a day. And if you multiply that by 365, it's about 22 billion liters.
Hopefully that can adequately answer everyone's questions around our consumption. We have also grown a lot as an economy since the plants or refineries started. So our capacity is just not there. With the estimation of about 500,000 barrels a day, though, South Africa is a big player in Africa. I think we can say that. But we are still a price taker, which is
correct.
A term I had to figure out for myself. But it basically, in a global market dominated by much larger economies, we take the price. We don't set it.
100%.
I want to move on to some quick fire questions because I like those. They clear things up very quickly, and it is our goal to make sure that accurate information is out there. Are there still supply disruptions?
Yes.
Are we seeing surcharges and price premiums?
Absolutely.
Is there another big increase coming?
Possibly.
Ooh. Well,
that one's difficult to predict.
It is. It's a game every day.
But when you look at the unit under recoveries as early as we are now in April, the indications are there that we're looking at another price increase. Yes.
Will government continue subsidising?
That's hard to say. That's government's decision to make.
Can this all go away easily or quickly?
I doubt that. I think whatever's happened here is going to linger on for a while. So I don't think it goes away in days or weeks. If things turn around and quiet down, maybe over the next few months, we'll see some relief filtering through.
Can it get worse?
Yes.
How bad is the impact in South Africa going to be?
It's going to be very heavy on the South African citizens and on the consumer, because as I said before, a higher oil price is going to lead to a situation where a basket of goods is just going to be so much more expensive. But people are going to not just pay more for goods, they're also going to pay more for transport, and they're going to pay more for lots of other things that are not easy to see on the surface of it.
Let's end it there for now. Thanks, Shane. Thank you to our listeners for all your questions and the engagement. If you enjoy what we're doing, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thank
Till
you,
next
Crystal.
time.